Hello, we're going to cover the advertising module today, and I'll start with the definition of advertising, and it's as follows. To produce the most persuasive possible selling message to the right prospect at the lowest possible cost. The source of that definition is the IPA, and that stands for the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising in the United Kingdom. The IPA represents the leading advertising agencies in the UK. So, what does this definition mean? Well, to persuade customers, consumers, to buy, to respond, possibly by telephone, possibly by visiting a website. The right prospect, who will want the product or the service and who can afford to buy it. And the lowest possible cost. This is by buying the space or the airtime at a negotiated price. I'm going to cover a brief history of advertising in the UK, but first I'll start outside the UK. A famous example of advertising was actually in ancient times in Rome, where the Christians would follow the sign of the fish. This was drawn on the walls of houses to lead these people to a secret destination for meetings on Friday evenings. These people became Catholics in their religion, and in remembrance they started to eat fish on Fridays. This still continues to the present day. The sign of the fish was in effect a logo, and this acts as a visual reminder. Think of the Nike swoosh or tick that is being used today. So there were posters drawn or painted on walls or on paper. Indeed, painted posters or billboards are still being used in such as India even today. In London, in Cheapside, which is near to St Paul's, a man had a horse-drawn cart, and on this cart was a four-sided wooden tower. All four sides were covered with handbills. They were the size of foolscap, which is similar to A4 size, slightly narrower, slightly longer, and they contained advertisements, all four sides of this tower. The man walked down Cheapside, he stopped, people would gather, look at all four sides, be informed with what was going on or what was available to be purchased. Then they would disperse, and the man would take his horse-drawn cart further down Cheapside, stop again, and another group of people would gather to read all the advertisements. Later came printing. Handbills were printed, posters were then printed, and of course it was the introduction of newspapers. And the first advertisements would not allow advertising originally, but eventually they decided to, because they could see this as pure profit to them. And they did accept advertising, but only on the front page. It had to be one column wide, and in those days so many inches deep. In the modern age, of course, that would be centimetres. And these early advertisements were for products such as tea and coffee and chocolate, all products that still exist today, so perhaps that proves that advertising can be very successful. These were all imported products, and so the importers needed to advertise to make people aware of their existence, the fact that they were now products that were available in this country. Later came magazine advertising at the latter end of the 19th century, and the oldest of those still in existence today is called The Lady. So many of these magazines were women's magazines. Then in the last century there was a movement towards advertising in the cinema in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, into the 1950s. Tremendous growth of advertising in the cinema. Many of those products were cosmetics and toiletries, soaps, toothpaste, shampoos, things of that nature. Then there was the growth of advertising on television. Television came into being many years ago, 1920s, but advertising was allowed not on BBC but on ITV when it commenced in September 1955. The first advertisement on that that station, that channel was actually for toothpaste, Gibbs SR toothpaste. And advertising on television became very successful and began to be a medium, really, that took advertising away from cinema and newspapers and magazines. It was able to reach people in their homes. Later in the UK came radio advertising. That was in the 1970s, 1973 that began, but that was only because of a change of law by the government of the day, the Labour government at that time. But radio had been big in other countries earlier than that, countries such as Australia, Canada and the United States. But of course television itself has grown, and there is now of course cable television and satellite television. So that medium has grown dramatically. Now of course we have advertising messages on the internet and on mobile phone. So where will the media opportunities exist in the future? Where will advertising be allowed to appear in due course?